Welcome to the Horizon Engage podcast, where we bring you expert opinion on geopolitical risk. Horizon Engage enables investors to make business decisions with confidence by providing intelligence on global developments and regional and country risk. My name is Sasha Zaslavsky. I'm Horizon Engage's president and co-founder, and I'm joined today by two of my best colleagues, Clementine Wallop and Andrew Farrand. We're going to talk about Africa today, and Clem and Andrew have split the continent. Andrew covers the Middle East and North Africa, and Clem is our regional director for Sub-Saharan Africa. I wanted to say a couple of words about them before we kick off. And when I said that they're my best colleagues, what I meant are two things. First is just the level of their expertise. They have lived in the continent and specifically in the countries that they cover in Nigeria and Algeria for years. But even more importantly, they deeply care about these countries, and it really comes across in their work. Clem has spent countless years traveling across Nigeria's regions. Andrew has been a star on Algeria's television, has written travel blogs, wrote a book about Algeria's youth. And this deep passion about the countries where they work in translates into the quality of our work because, we run human networks, we provide human intelligence. And Clem and Andrew oversee in-country teams in Sub-Saharan and North Africa, oversee in-country experts. And they are able to deliver those fantastic insights for our clients that are the polar opposite of the rumors that are often scraped from social media or AI-generated drivel that often masquerades as research and analysis. So by reliance on Clem and Andrew and the in-country teams that they oversee, Horizon Engage is able to deliver those high-quality insights that are really valued. We're going to talk about Africa today. Africa is being looked at in a very different way now following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the war in Iran. And we're going to talk about borders, blocks, and banks, three key aspects of investing in Africa, in particular investing in Africa's natural resources. My first question will be about borders. There's now an almost delusional enthusiasm that many investors and certainly many African governments deploy when they talk about opportunities in Africa. Obviously, investors are looking for ways to reduce their exposure to choke points, exposure to the Gulf. But it seems that not much has perhaps changed on the continent itself. There are still wars going on. There's a lot of instability. There are jihadist threats in the Sahel. There's a lot of violence from Libya to Somalia to Nigeria to South Africa. And there are lots of border disputes. And my first question is, are investors who are perhaps willing to be more tolerant of these border disputes, of general instability in the continent, are they deluding themselves? Or is there a real change underway that's going on, in particular as a result of the changes in risk appetite on the back of the war in Iran? And Andrew, let me start with you.
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks for the kind introduction. I would highlight a dynamic that we've seen in the last couple of months that I think is particularly interesting when it comes to borders and these issues you raised. You would think in an environment where energy prices have gone up precipitously in the last few months that there's greater stakes around border disputes and therefore greater reason to hold on tightly to anything that you get, anything that you have any claim at all to. But in fact, in a couple of cases, what we've seen is that there are countries who are doing the opposite and are saying now is a moment among high energy prices, high energy demand, and particularly when we look at North Africa, we're thinking about European demand. This is a moment where it's just better to get barrels out of the ground and just get energy moving to market. So a place that comes to mind immediately is this triangle between Malta, Libya, and Tunisia, which has been disputed for decades. There's overlapping border disputes. Italy, on some of the maps, gets into the mix as well. It's quite messy. And what we've actually seen in the last few weeks and months is a series of moves by governments in those countries to reduce some of the friction around these disputes, turn down the temperature, get companies in place exploring, looking at seismic data and preparing to drill wells. So we're seeing a move towards just, again, getting barrels to market as the priority in this environment. There's other cases, of course, when it comes to North Africa. Libya's got its disputes with Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, another messy situation there. That one is a little more up in the air, but I think we're seeing a lot of signs that there are increasing moves towards just getting exploration going and trying to assess what resources are available and getting them to market as quickly as possible.
Club, do you see this generally cooperative attitude on government's parts in sub-Saharan Africa?
Firstly, Sasha, thank you very much for the extremely flattering introduction. We won't mention to our colleagues that we're your favorites, though they might see when they watch this podcast. Um, Yes, we do see this. And I think it runs counter to lots of the narrative around sub Saharan Africa that it's so fractious, that it's so contentious. Um, we actually see examples of countries that outwardly have had historically quite a contentious relationship or have instigated arbitration or legal processes against one another around these, now saying, the resource is getting stale, the resource is stagnating, our production isn't rising. What can we do to re-inject some energy? What can we do to get that production up? And going together seems to be better than not going at all. So some examples that we've seen, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon, some real cooperation at presidential level between those two leaders saying, look, let's make this thing happen. Let's get our production up. Let's both benefit. I think I should also complement this with some insight from the industry side and just say that this is dovetailing with a real push for exploration, a real resurgence in exploration right down the Atlantic margin. And so we have governments on one side who really need to boost the resource, and we have companies on the other who are going looking for more barrels, and they are prepared to look at trickier and more complex propositions, both in terms of geopolitical risk, but in terms of the literal border of where this resource might sit and who is in charge of it, than they might have been 2 or 3 years ago.
Makes sense. Well, they have higher risk tolerance. They're prepared to look at trickier places. Can they get paid there? Which is our next question. And not even get paid. That problem itself is not new. I remember the problems that companies have encountered in Egypt for decades, for instance. And all around the world, companies are exposed to currency fluctuations. In Africa, though, it seems that more and more challenges arise from not just central banks, but banking unions.
Mhm,
Share your take on how this impacts the investment environment.
absolutely. So I should say that, as Sasha mentioned, this isn't new. The Central African Central Bank, apologies, not very elegant, um, is has been in talks with investors for some years about how to manage restoration funds. And that's part of a wider change and tighter regulation around resource company proceeds and how those are managed, crucially, where those are managed. Is it in country? Is it not? And what kinds of accounts and who oversees those accounts? Um, this has become that much more relevant and that much more acute as some of these economies struggle for foreign exchange reserves, as the United States deploys commercial diplomacy, and as I mentioned, you have this great search for barrels happening and a lot of competition around the continent for who is going to secure that capital. So, why does it matter? Why do these regulations around banking, both in the Central African Union and in the West African group as well, why do they matter? It matters commercially. When you're drafting contracts, you're dealing with the government of a single country, but often with the regulatory regime of a bank that is managing the interests of 6 or 8 countries. That creates particular complexities and different dynamics. Within that union, you will have countries who are in very different economic situations. In West Africa, let's think about Cote d'Ivoire sitting next to a Senegal, for example. And you have different voices in those unions who want different things from those regulatory frameworks. And they are managing the implementation of increasingly tight frameworks in different ways. So, an example of this is in Cote d'Ivoire, where the technological implementation of tighter regulatory frameworks is further ahead than anywhere else in that banking union. So if we look at West Africa, the regulatory burden is increasing, and it's increasing in Cote d'Ivoire, but they have just stayed ahead by a nose by making sure their implementation is that much smoother. There are other angles to this as well, though. The operational risk and operational challenge of being told that you are going to be engaging with local banks that might have lower capacity than what you're used to or capacity constraints. Then there is something I find very interesting, which is the diplomatic angle to this. The ways in which something that doesn't ostensibly sound hugely significant, so restoration funds for natural resources companies, is actually driven very high level diplomatic engagement between the US administration and the leaders of many African states. So, as I look at our work on the continent, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this sort of work and this sort of dynamic that we're being asked to look at across the region.
Great. We've talked about borders. We've talked about banks. Let's address the third B in our trinity, the blocks. And there's a lot of tension between direct bids and bid rounds these days, right? Many governments have instituted bid rounds, not least to fight corruption, while in the meantime, a lot of companies are getting quite annoyed with them because they're burdensome, they're time consuming, and as Clem mentioned, people want to get the results quickly in an easier way. Uh, Andrew, where do you see this tension in North Africa?
So it's played out in an interesting way in North Africa just in the last year or two, and I think it's an instructive period to examine in the sense that if one looks at the various experiences of bid rounds, they haven't been smashing successes, and you can look at the recent handful that have happened in Libya and Algeria, both for the first time in a number of years. Egypt has much more recurring bid rounds, and IOCs are used to engaging with Egypt in those processes. But what's been quite remarkable about the Libyan and Algerian experiences is the rounds themselves didn't really attract the kind of interest that the governments hoped they would. So if you're looking, for example, at the NOC, the National Oil Corporation in Libya, they put 21 blocks on offer. They were really hoping for a lot of interest across that whole range. They did get interest. We spent a lot of time during that year that bid round was active speaking to a lot of companies who were looking closely at Libya and looking very seriously at Libya, but not all of them ended up bidding. And it's partly because of the challenges of doing business in Libya that scared some off. But there was also a recognition at this point that Libya is a place that you can actually maybe do business again in a way that you couldn't a couple years ago. So there was interest. What's interesting is that it manifested itself a lot more in direct negotiations. And so in some ways, the NOC's big success here was in launching this bid round and showing people Libya is open for business, as they like to say, and then getting people to take another look at the country for the first time in a while. And what that actually generated was not everyone pushing down the door to get into the bid round necessarily. But it did generate a lot of traffic to the NOC's offices. And a lot of people spoke to the NOC, came to the realization that there were blocks that were not necessarily part of that bid round that were of interest to them, perhaps brownfield sites that were worth another look. So you had, over the course of the bid round period, a lot of international oil corporations coming in, doing deals on the side. And in many ways, the bid round just functioned as kind of the bait that brought everybody to that process. Algeria, a little bit of a different story, but also an interesting one where they have run a bid round in 2024 and 25, and then have just launched another one in 2026 that's tried to build on that mixed experience they had last year. And the innovation that they brought to the process, that ALNAF, the upstream regulator, has brought to the process, is to launch an initial period of nomination, as they called it, where investors could come and review a series of possible blocks that might be included in the eventual bid round, and then nominate those to be part of the process. So this was an attempt to get more investor input earlier in the process and try to avoid some of the challenges that tripped them up last time and led to some blocks being fairly undersubscribed and having underwhelming participation. So that round is ongoing. We will see come November when it closes how successful that process is. But it's an innovation, and it's a way in which the regulator is trying to generate a bit more interest in a place that has had a mixed kind of record in the past, that has a reputation among investors as being promising but also difficult. And so they're trying some new ways to work around that, and we're going to be watching closely to see how they succeed and what the uptake among investors is like. But I am optimistic, and I do think there's a good chance that it will bear fruit.
I think it's fascinating, Andrew, that Libya, a country that's being torn apart, that has two governments, parallel central banks, parallel energy structures, is actually doing a very good job and pursuing this quite smart and sophisticated strategy vis-a-vis investors. I know you're watching Nigeria and Angola in this context. What can you tell us about developments there?
I am, absolutely. I think I spend a lot of time watching Nigeria, watching Angola, and watching Angola, watching Nigeria. Um, they are very mindful of what the other is doing, and they know that they're competing directly for capital. They have had IOC chief executives tell them so. Um, so uh, where Nigeria is heading towards what Andrew described, the age of the perpetual bid round. So they are going to be overlapping bid rounds all the time. And Angola's already doing that. But at the same time as it runs overlapping bid rounds, they also offer direct negotiation. And that's a real competitive advantage that they have at the moment over Nigeria when again we think about the pace of decision making in industry. So for me, next year, Nigeria is very likely going to reopen and amend its Petroleum Industry Act. Under the terms of that act, there are very strict limitations on the circumstances in which you can engage in direct award, which was intentional. It was a decision to put clear blue water between the problematic awards of the past and competitive licensing today. But a signpost for us to watch is that if Nigeria softens the language around direct award, it will be a sign that they appreciate licensing rounds perhaps haven't been the most efficient way of allocating their blocks. And they're confident now in the strength of their regulators and their institutions to award those blocks to competent buyers.
That's great. Clem has already started talking a little bit about the future, and we have a few minutes left. And Clem, I wanted to ask you to share your take on our upcoming work and the developments you'll be watching in the countries that you cover in the coming months. Perhaps the signposts that investors should look out for to help us understand the direction for key resource-rich states. Andrew, let me start with you and ask you about the work that you'll be doing, especially with regard to the benchmarking tool that we are working on.
Absolutely. So we're in a really interesting moment globally in terms of energy markets. So many things are being reassessed right now. And so it's a great moment to have a tool like the one we have brought out a couple of years ago and have been working on steadily since then. This is our advanced tool. It's a country scoring tool that tries to benchmark risk of various types across various jurisdictions. And it's a really useful tool for investors. And it's going to be a really fascinating tool in this moment. We're currently doing a rescore of a number of countries across the globe, a handful in the region I cover that I'm really excited to see the results about. And the reason is because in this moment where we've had such an incredible, profound shock to global energy markets, it's really interesting to examine what has actually changed for investors. And the answer is not always obvious. And I think one of the things that we as analysts appreciate about this tool is it reveals things that we didn't even sometimes know. And I'm talking about my own scores sometimes reveal things that I didn't even know about the country that I think about every day and cover closely. And the reason is just there are so many ways in a moment like this where it's hard to separate the signal from the noise. And I think that that's a really huge problem that investors face all the time, especially in a moment of crisis, especially in a moment of change. We're all glued to our phones, we're glued to the TV, we're watching these incredible streams of information flow before our eyes. And it's so hard to know what actually is moving the needle. So, what I love about the tool that we have is that it really focuses in on concrete things that matter for investors. And that's why I'm excited to see this rescoring process go through, because it's going to reveal for us all of the ways in which this Hormuz crisis has profoundly shifted investors' outlook on various jurisdictions, but also the ways in which those jurisdictions actually haven't changed. And I think there's going to be some very important conclusions in both of those categories. I'm very excited to see it, but generally just really looking forward to this learning process that'll help us to digest that information and share it with clients.
I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. We're sometimes blinded by the enormity of these geopolitical calamities that we see, by the tectonic shifts in the security environment and in the Gulf. But life continues in individual countries, and government bureaucracies continue to live as they did before.
They
Clem, I know
sure
you cover
do.
a lot of these government bureaucracies and legislative processes
Mhm.
in Sub-Saharan Africa. What are you watching there?
So, if you'll allow me, I'll take it from the absolutely enormous, the tectonic, the huge tracts of land to the single human dynamics. What we're watching and what's most significant in Sub Saharan Africa practice in the next maybe 9 to 12 months are some big legislative and regulatory changes. So, Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, Namibia, which is going to be huge given the size of the resource there, Cote d'Ivoire making regulatory change as well. And you think, oh, all of this happens on paper, all of this is going through parliaments and courts. But the way that we like to think about it is humans first, human relationships first. Lots of these regulatory changes and legislative changes will alter the position of NOCs and empower regulators in those countries and delivery units in those countries. So we spend a lot of time using our stakeholder intelligence tool, Engage Interactive, mapping those human dynamics. How do people get along? What are the things they like about one another? What are the things that strain the relationship between the two of them? And that's the work that I enjoy the most, thinking about how single human interactions make these tectonic shifts.
I'm very glad that you brought this human dimension as we wrap up this podcast, because we talked about three B's today, but it's the P, the people, that really trumps all the analysis. Right, at the end of the day, it is about understanding what people need, people who matter in the governments and the NOCs and societies in all these countries, and that's where I hope we'll continue to shine. I'd like to thank Clem and Andrew for joining us today, for sharing the insights in this episode. And I'd encourage you to tune in again for more from Horizon Engage, where we'll bring you expert opinion on geopolitical and country risk. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.